if events went differently in The Amazing Spider-Man? What if Andrew Garfield's Peter Parker had bonded with the Venom symbiote in the first movie? Welcome back, my fellow watchers of the multiverse, back to the roots of Miss the Part. I will be taking a look at how one small change can ripple through space and time. Join me as I embark on a twisted journey of events. What if Season 2, Episode 1? What if the Venom symbiote was in the Amazing Spider-Man universe? The Venom symbiote in this timeline was scheduled to arrive on Earth years later, but what if the war which drove it away from its home planet happened before its destined time? Within the Amazing Spider-Man universe, what if Venom had to quickly escape its planet to Earth as a means to survive? How will it change the Amazing Spider-Man timeline? Join me as we watch. Peter Parker knew that he should have felt guilt for letting the criminal go away, but all he felt was rage. He had stormed out of the house after a heated argument with Uncle Ben, and he did not have time to be anyone's hero.
Where is he? Where's my dad? He didn't think it was his responsibility to be here and tell me this himself. Oh, come on, how dare you? How dare I? How dare you?
He knew Uncle Ben did not know that he had powers now. Powers that would humble any other human. Peter had gotten bit by a spider at the Oscorp facility, and the bite gave him spider-like abilities. He could stick to walls, and he had immense strength, reflexes, and a unique sixth sense he liked to call his spider sense. Peter Parker blamed the disrespect that Uncle Ben showed him on his ignorance. If Uncle Ben knew what he was capable of, then maybe he would bow down to him. Peter pondered on revealing his powers to Ben and May. Maybe then he will get the respect he thought that he deserved. Peter quickly decided against this. He knew how much he meant to Uncle Ben and Aunt May. He knew that they loved him, but sometimes the way they displayed their love was enraging to him. Despite all of his rage and anger, Peter decided to apologize to Uncle Ben in this timeline for his behavior. He loved them too, but the recent events of the spider bite had him lost. He had much more power without a purpose. Peter had just concluded on apologizing when an eerie light shined through the window of the store he was in. The sound of a gunshot immediately filled the night too. Peter suddenly ran out to find the source of the gunshot. Maybe he had found a purpose for his powers after all, he thought. What Peter saw petrified him. Uncle Ben had followed Peter out of the house. He didn't mean to enrage him, but Peter's recent behavior was unsettling and surprising to him. Uncle Ben knew something was up. He had to find a way to get Peter to open up to him. Uncle Ben suddenly saw a robber fleeing from a store, and his first instinct was to stop him. Like the original timeline, the robber, sensing Uncle Ben's motive, quickly pulled out his gun and aimed it at Ben. As he pulled the trigger, Ben's light flashed before his eyes, and he desperately prayed for a miracle. Suddenly, an eerie bright light shined and blinded the eyes of the robber. This proved to be the miracle that Ben prayed for. The robber lost his aim, and the bullet penetrated Uncle Ben's arm instead. The robber, still high on adrenaline and unnerved by the eerie light, and the image of a bleeding Uncle Ben, took to his heels. Uncle Ben was losing a lot of blood, but he was glad that he was still alive. Peter suddenly appeared by his side, and before he knew it, an ambulance had arrived. Ben did notice, though, that when he was being loaded up by the ambulance, Peter was nowhere to be found. Peter had been petrified by the sight that he saw. Uncle Ben spiraled out on the road in a pool of blood. The image broke something in him. The sight filled him with an unthinkable rage, so much so that Peter made sure Uncle Ben was in safe hands. He took off in pursuit of the criminal. No normal human being would be able to track the robber down after the amount of time that had passed. But Peter was not a normal human after all. Parker combined all of his powers to hunt the robber down, and it paid out. Peter found the robber standing beside a strange rock, and he had a strange grin etched on his face. Peter threw caution to the wind and missed the wind signals. he was getting from his spidey sense and attacked. Peter, with a shout of rage, threw a punch to the robber's face, but it was caught by the robber. Peter was surprised. He knew his punches could make huge dents in steel and even break walls, but this robber did not flinch, not even a bit. Peter attempted to withdraw his hand, but the robber had a hawk-like grip on him. All the rage Parker had was quickly drained out, and fear took its place. Peter started pleading with the robber to let him go, but the robber remained unfazed and still, with a creepy grin on his mouth. Suddenly, the grin expanded more than Peter thought was humanly possible, and the robber spoke to Peter. "Finally, the perfect host," he said, and suddenly, the black goo started transforming itself from the robber to Peter Parker. That was the last thing Peter Parker saw as all went dark for him. Peter Parker suddenly woke up from his sleep. He was sweating profusely because he had a nightmare about Uncle Ben getting shot and about the creepy dark goo. Parker quickly showered and dressed up for school before going downstairs for breakfast. When Parker went downstairs, he discovered that the nightmare he had thought about was a reality. Aunt May sat alone on the breakfast table, while she sobbed quietly with the picture of Ben in her palms. Shivers ran down Peter's spine. He thought that they had lost Uncle Ben, but Aunt May, who immediately noticed him in the room, killed the thought in him. Uncle Ben was still very much alive at the hospital. Peter quickly went on to find out the details of what had happened to Ben, and what had happened most especially to himself. He was surprised by what he had heard. As Peter walked through the hallways of the school, he played the conversation he had with Aunt May in his head repeatedly. She claimed that Peter came home on his own, but did not quite say anything to her. She stated that he just walked up to his room, and she did not disturb him, as she guessed that he must have been in a pretty bad state after Uncle Ben's shooting. Peter's problem was that he did not remember walking into the house. The only thing he remembered was trying to punch the robber, the black goo, and then darkness. The memory of the dark goo sent shivers down Peter's spine, but he was quickly pulled out of his thoughts by Flash. Flash wanted to deliberately bump into him, but because of Peter's spider sense, it all seemed like slow motion. He had enough time to dodge Flash and escape, but a dark voice came into his mind. The voice compelled him to teach Flash a lesson. Parker suddenly felt rage and shoved Flash into a locker with so much force that it left a huge dent and knocked Flash out. The commotion caused a lot of noise that attracted the attention of the crowd and teachers. Peter was immediately called up to the principal's office. As Peter made his way to the office, he saw the look of disappointment on the face of Gwen Stacy. Peter was extremely lucky. The principal decided to drop all the charges made against him and free him from any punishment. This action was supported by the fact that Flash refused to confess that Peter was the one who pushed him. Instead, he stated that he slipped and fell. The principal, however, told Peter that his saving grace was because he felt that the narrow escape of death by Uncle Ben had traumatized Peter. The principal also decided not to report the matter to Ben or May, as they were in a fragile state, but warned Parker not to get into any more violence. Peter was inwardly nonchalant about the whole ordeal. The only thing he was feeling was amazement. He was amazed at how he was able to perform such a feat of strength without applying much power. He decided that he would experiment with his powers when it was nighttime and test how far he could really go. Peter laid in the shadows as he awaited an unlucky prey to fall into his trap. He was hunting for criminals and for a victim. He figured that if he could dispose of them or beat them into the point that they could not get back up, then he would rid the world of crime. The image of Uncle Ben's body spiraled on the ground in a pool of blood was still vivid in Peter's mind. Peter had, however, noticed some amazing things as he started his exploration. He found out that he could walk on walls as opposed to crawling on them before. His spidey sense was enhanced, reflexes, and strength had been greatly increased. Peter figured that the upgrade came from the black goo, and he started having no problems in accepting it. Peter did not have to wait quite long before he had an opportunity to test out his newly improved powers on an unfortunate person. He spotted a huge man in an alleyway threatening a woman with a pocket knife to empty her purse. Peter was about to leap into action when he discovered that his identity was important to him. He needed to hide his face, and he needed to do so fast, as the man was almost done robbing the woman. Suddenly, out of instinct, Peter looked into a puddle of water next to where he was hiding and discovered that he was covered in a sort of black suit made out of the black goo that entered his body. The suit had a stylized spider sign on his chest, just as Peter would have wanted it to be. It was as if the suit could read his mind. Peter suddenly leaped into action and landed between the man and the woman, without a second thought. As Peter analyzed the man, he concluded that he didn't really need a pocket knife to rob people. The thief stood at 7 feet, and the shirt he had on was on the verge of tearing because of his bulging muscles. Peter concluded from the multiple tattoos and scars on the man's face that he was a gangster. The entire analysis took less than a second for Parker, and before the huge man could speak, Peter had snagged the purse from him and sucker punched him into the abdomen. As Peter returned the purse and its contents to the woman, the criminal wanted to jump him from behind, but Peter was too fast for him. Parker turned and held the man by his neck in midair. As Peter stared at the man, he remembered the image of Uncle Ben's hopelessness and bleeding body, and then he lost it as uncontrollable rage filled his body. Peter started punching and beating up the criminal to a pulp. The cries and pleas of the rescued woman for Peter to stop fell on deaf ears as he continued unleashing his fury on the criminal. Suddenly, the wails of police sirens broke Peter from his actions. The car blocked the only entrance of the alleyway, and the policemen already had their guns trained on him. Peter knew he could climb walls, but he did not even think he was fast enough. Peter started wishing he had webs like real spiders. Maybe that would have helped him get out of the situation. Suddenly, as if as an answer to his request, Peter's right arm shot up, and from the upward wrist squirted out a web. The web had caught a building and propelled Peter out of harm's way. The night was filled with shouts of joy and laughter as Parker swung through the city, building to building, while looking out for criminals to exact revenge on. Peter was in a good mood today. He still remembered how the news reporters were amazed about how the crime rates had reduced drastically. In their own words, they said that Venom was literally beating the criminals down so that they would not get back up, and that Venom was a poison. Peter smiled as he remembered how the name Venom came about. He was thinking about calling himself Spider-Man when the word Venom popped into his head. He figured that the word captivated the essence of his character, as he was deadly and poisonous to criminals. He just started leaving the criminals he beat to a pulp with the name, and the rest became history. The main reason Peter was happy today was because of Gwen. It had taken him a long time, and a lot of pleading and begging, but she finally decided to give him a chance. She had also invited Peter to her house for a family dinner, and he was practically dancing to her house. He hoped that it would be a nice dinner. Meanwhile, Dr. Connors was in a crisis, like the original timeline. Peter had aided him recently with finding the missing ingredients for his formula, and it was ready. The source of the crisis, however, was that he was ordered to test the serum out on humans, but it felt that it was not ready yet. His refusal led to him losing his job. He was sacked by Ratha, who was on his way to test the serum on the veteran hospital, an idea that suddenly popped into Dr. Connors' mind. He would test it on himself. The plan was crazy by all aspects, and it could even lead to the loss of his life. As Dr. Connors deliberated on the idea, his gaze fell on his missing arm, and that was his motivation. That was all he needed. His interest in the regenerative field was given life by the loss of his arm. No matter how philanthropic he would want it to sound, he was doing the research and experimentations for him, as much as he was doing it for everyone. Dr. Connors took up the serum and injected it into himself. For a few seconds, nothing happened, which made Dr. Connors question whether he was immune to the effects of the serum. Then, suddenly, the intense pain started, and it crawled up his back, into his spine, and Dr. Connors had blacked out. Connors suddenly woke up, drenched in sweat. His brain and senses were still trying to figure out what had happened to him. When he noticed it, his arm had regrown. Dr. Connors could not believe it. He had done it. Kurt had made history. Connors quickly moved, and he intercepted Ratha, who wanted to test the serum on the veteran hospital. As Connors was on his way, he started feeling strange. He started feeling changes in his body. Scales started sprouting out of Connors' skin, and he started developing claws and razor-sharp teeth. Even his eyes had changed. After a few moments, an angry lizard-looking like creature started creating havoc and destruction at the Williamsburg's bridge. What many did not know, however, was that the lizard was actually Dr. Kurt Connors. Back at the dinner, it was full of surprises for both Peter and Gwen. The first surprise was when Peter discovered that Captain Stacy was Gwen's father. Peter had quite a few close calls with the man on his quest to capture him. The hatred that Captain Stacy felt for Venom could not be felt around the table. He accused Venom for taking laws into his own hands, and as much as Captain Stacy felt that he needed to face the law. While the dinner was going on, the reporters of an angry lizard man came into Captain Stacy, and they were immediately confirmed by the news reporters. Stacy immediately took off to combat the crisis. Peter, on the other hand, felt that he had much more important things to do. He had with Gwen. After the dinner, Gwen took Peter up to her room, and they professed their love to each other. This gladdened the heart of Peter so much that Peter revealed his secret identity to Gwen. The result was not what he had hoped for. Gwen freaked out completely and sent him out of her house. She claimed that she could not be in love with a man who had no regrets for the lives of the people. This greatly angered Peter, and he made sure that all the criminals he caught that night felt his anger. Peter had been through a lot for the past few days. He was on his way to school as he went down memory lane. Peter had been in a financial crisis because of Uncle Ben's hospital bills, and the money was getting too much for Aunt May to foot. Peter had thought of an inconvenient way to make money, and he even thought about taking money from criminals until he saw an advertisement. The press were looking for pictures of both Venom and the lizard, and they were willing to pay a handsome fee for it. Luckily, Peter was already Venom, but the pictures of only Venom would not be enough to foot the bills. He needed Lizard too, and he went in to hunt him down. Peter had tracked him to a sewer, and the confrontation with the lizard had been a brief one. Venom had tossed him around like a doll, and he had beaten the lizard until he reverted into his human form. This greatly shocked Peter, and he displayed his face to Dr. Connors. As a result of this, Connors saw a glimpse of Peter's face before he passed out at the sewers. Peter was still taken aback, but he left what he thought was Dr. Connors' lifeless body at the sewers. While he took the pictures, he took the cameras that he strategically positioned to get the money for Uncle Ben's bills. He was saddened that he had to kill Dr. Connors. He didn't know that he was the lizard, but he had to do it, so he left him there. Peter had left the sewer. Peter was surprised at the level of lack of empathy that he had for Kurt. He had been noticing faintly how his behaviors and character had been changing, ever so slightly but rapidly. As he wanted to dwell on the thought, a picture of Uncle Ben was brought into his mind again, and it quickly killed his revisions about his rapid change. Dr. Connors was a monster, and he deserved to die, the voice told him. Peter didn't know if that was true, but he accepted it. Peter had later paid for the bills and Uncle Ben was back home, but he was still in a semi-vegetable state. Peter was shocked at how far he had come as he entered the school halls. Everything was working in perfect condition for him, except the issue of Gwen. He hoped that he could change that today. Nothing could go wrong today. Or so Peter had thought in this timeline. Every time something happens, there's always a shockwave of negativity. Although Peter thought everything was going well for him, in this timeline things will take a dark turn. Dr. Connors was not dead after all, as Peter had thought he was, and he was currently in the school sewers. He wanted to exact his revenge on Peter. The lizard glanced down at the metal glove device, created to fit his palms exactly, and grinned. He had a plan to take Peter out, and if his calculations were right, it would hurt a lot. The lizard immediately bursted out of the sewer system via the school's public toilets, and it was time for the plan to be executed. Venom had been winning the fight so far, but this was about to change. The lizard picked himself from the bookshelf that Venom had dumped him on. He grinned, and his hands, which were fitted with a metal plate, gloves together. This created a sonic sound wave that blasted Venom. The effect of the blast drove Venom insane. Dr. Connors smiled. He was right. High-frequency sonic waves were Venom's weakness, and he had noticed how Venom had looked phased when he banged his head against a metal pipe that generated sonic waves at their last fight in the sewer. It was time to end this. Lizard decided as he walked towards Peter to kill him. Suddenly, Gwen jumped out of nowhere but was stabbed in the back. Gwen was quickly swatted aside by Lizard's tail, and he quickly followed it up with a claw. Gwen had stayed behind to watch the fight, even when the whole school had been deserted by students. She noted in her notepad that the effect that sonic waves had on Venom, but when she saw that Lizard was about to make the kill, she knew that she had to do something to save Peter. When Dr. Connors turned his attention towards Parker, he had escaped. Gwen smiled. Her efforts were not in vain. She had been able to save Peter, but sadly, she was not sure she would be able to save her own life. She shed a tear as darkness slowly crept into her vision, even as her life embedded away from her blood, pouring from her gut. Captain Stacy's face was filled with extreme rage, and he didn't even think it was possible to get more angry until he saw Peter was Venom. It had been only a few days after the death of Gwen Stacy, whom he blamed it on Venom, as he saw traces of his webs on the school grounds. Captain Stacy had discovered Gwen's note about sonic waves being the weakness of Venom, and had gotten himself a sonic wave gun from Oscorp. Currently, Peter laid in pain at his feet as a result of the blast that was released on him. The whole world could see that Peter was now Venom. As the news crew covered the event via their helicopter, Captain Stacy still had a vengeful look in his face. And as he wanted to fire another sonic blast, Peter snagged the gun from him with a web and broke it into two. Peter then proceeded to dodge all of the bullets fired on him by Stacy's crew and threw a car at them in retaliation. When they were recovered, Venom was gone. He had gone to seek out the Lizard at the Oscorp Tower. Venom had the Lizard lying at his feet. All the damage Lizard had inflicted on him was already healed by the symbiote. The only problem Venom had was getting rid of Dr. Connors and taking revenge for the death of Gwen. Dr. Connors had metal plate gloves, and he did that by ripping both of his arms out. Venom was in a very vengeful mood, and this was because of the death of Gwen. Venom lifted up Lizard by his neck, leaped and impaled him on one of the pillars of Oscorp's towers. The Lizard rapidly transformed back to Kurt Connors, and with a teary eye he beckoned on Peter to come forth, which made Peter withdraw his mask. "Your father was," were his last words as he gave up the ghost before he could complete his statement. Peter actually shed a tear. His emotions had been coming back to him since the death of Gwen. As he came closer to the body of Dr. Kirk Connors, a bullet immediately penetrated his chest. It was Captain Stacy who shot him with a sniper. But Stacy's joy was short-lived as Peter's suit ejected the bullet from his body and healed him. Stacy had only succeeded in making Venom mad. As Venom started approaching him, he called for backup and the entire tower was flooded with policemen. Venom only grinned. The scene was a grisly one. The bodies of police officers were littered on the floor of the tower and on the ground below it as Venom threw a handful of them to their deaths. The only people that were alive on the tower were Venom and Captain Stacy. As Venom reached Stacy, he was about to rip his throat out with his newly formed claws, but a voice stopped him. He could recognize the voice from a mile away. It was Uncle Ben's voice, and currently he was being carried in by a helicopter. Uncle Ben pleaded with Peter and told him a quote he and his father shared. "With great power comes great responsibility," Uncle Ben said with tears in his eyes as he surveyed the amount of damage Peter had done. Peter's eyes were now opened and he discovered that he had been manipulated the entire time, most of the time by the black goo. He was trying to do the right thing by stopping Dr. Connors from unleashing his bioweapon on the city, but now he even saw himself that he was doing wrong by Venom. Peter stood still and allowed Stacy and other officers to prune him off of the symbiote with their sonic blasters as he mourned the deaths of the people he had killed or caused. Later, Peter was led in handcuffs by a swarm of police officers into the night. And that is going to be What If the Amazing Spider-Man had the Venom symbiote in The Amazing Spider-Man 1. It definitely would have been an interesting take on the character if Venom was introduced during the events of The Amazing Spider-Man and even the universe itself. I honestly believe that the Venomverse is connected to the TASMverse, but that's just a theory. But honestly, seeing the Venom symbiote in this timeline definitely changes a lot of things. Uncle Ben only gets injured, and a lot of the events with the Lizard don't take place because the Lizard gets badly beaten, so much so that he doesn't get as motivated to enact on his plan. And I think that was something really interesting about writing this story and really coming up with the idea about it, is that I wanted to have the Lizard as the main villain, but I also wanted to make Peter a villain as well, and having him getting possessed by the symbiote would have been very interesting. I think events definitely would have taken this turn, and I also took little pieces from the 90s Spider-Man cartoon where Spider-Carnage is able to give up the symbiote and his power because of Uncle Ben, and I kind of did the same here with Uncle Ben finally, clicking into Peter's head that Peter had to give up the symbiote because if he didn't, he would have killed Captain Stacy that day. And I guarantee you that if the Lizard wasn't killed by Peter, I think the Lizard could have won in this timeline. But anyways, what did you guys think of Season 2, Episode 1? These episodes will not be connected. These will all be one-off episodes, so I do hope that you tune in for the next episode, which will be coming soon. I cannot wait to showcase it. But anyways, if you guys are new around here, do make sure to subscribe, like, share, as it really helps the channel out a ton. And also, make sure you share this video with your friends and stay all up to date with the latest content. I post Monday, Wednesday, Friday, Saturday, Sundays, so expect any videos on those days and times. Anyways, as always, guys, thanks for tuning in, and have a wonderful day. Peace out.